$175 million. That is what Iran is losing every single day under the American oil blockade, and the United Arab Emirates just walked out of OPEC because they decided this game is no longer worth playing for them. Think about that for a second. The same week, the Pentagon told Congress the Iran war is, quote, practically over. The cartel that has shaped global energy for half a century is quietly tearing itself apart, and almost nobody on cable television is willing to say it out loud. There is more, and it is bigger than oil. America just ended a 76-day government shutdown without solving anything that caused it. Trump is rattling the saber at Cuba while pretending the Iran chapter is closed. And the Federal Reserve had 4 dissenting votes in a single meeting, the worst internal split since 1992. But first, the story that lands directly on your wallet, your gas pump, and your retirement account this week. Here is why the UAE walking out of OPEC is bigger than it looks. This is the first time since the cartel was founded that a Gulf state has openly broken ranks during an active American military campaign. That is not a price dispute. That is a fracture in the alliance that has anchored the dollar for 2 generations. The event itself is straightforward. Refining margins through last month were running at extraordinary levels, and the major American producers, ExxonMobil and Chevron, ran their refineries flat out to capture the spread. Iran, meanwhile, is hemorrhaging roughly $175 million a day in lost oil revenue. The blockade is real. The storage is filling up, and Tehran has nowhere to put the crude. The complication is that the head of Central Command and the president sat down this week and decided to keep the blockade in place even after declaring the war over. So the war is officially finished, but the economic siege continues, and the markets are starting to notice the contradiction. And here is what nobody is saying out loud. The UAE did not leave OPEC because they sided with Iran. They left because they realized America is now using the oil cartel as a weapons system, and being inside it during a US-led siege puts their own export contracts at risk. What this means for you over the next 60 days is simple. Gasoline prices in the United States have already touched $4.20 in several markets, and there is no immediate ceiling. My read is that this ends one of 2 ways. Either Tehran capitulates and global crude collapses, or Tehran holds out, and the American consumer pays for the standoff at the pump through the holiday season. Neither outcome is good for the dollar, and speaking of institutions hiding the real cost of all of this, if this analysis is landing for you, a subscription costs nothing and keeps this channel independent. Now, about Cuba. The same week the president said the Iran war is, quote, practically over, he ordered the Pentagon and the Treasury to prepare a, quote, practically immediate response against Cuba, including secondary sanctions on any country or company doing business with the island. That language matters because it is exactly the language Putin used in 2014 before annexing Crimea. The same vocabulary, the same speed, the same contempt for legal process. The event here is concrete. The president signed instructions to expand sanctions on Cuban firms and on any third country entity that maintains commercial ties with Havana. The complication is whether those secondary sanctions will apply to Russian tankers that have been quietly servicing the Cuban energy market for the last decade. Because if the answer is no, the entire sanctions regime is a bluff, and Wall Street already knows it. The revelation is this: Cuba is not the actual target. The actual target is the precedent. If the White House can sanction a hemisphere neighbor over an internal political crisis, it can do the same to Mexico, to Venezuela, to anyone the administration decides has misbehaved. That is a structural change in how American power gets used, and the Treasury market is starting to price the risk premium. Now look, this is where the third story enters, and it is the one your colleagues at the office have not heard yet. The Federal Reserve held interest rates steady this week, but the vote was 4 members in dissent, the deepest split inside the central bank since October of 1992. 3 regional Fed presidents from Cleveland, Minneapolis, and Dallas refused to back the easing language in the policy statement. 1 governor wanted to cut rates immediately. The committee is no longer reading the same data. The complication here is that markets had already priced in a unanimous hold. A 4-way dissent at the Fed is the kind of signal that quietly tells big institutional money that the inflation fight is not over and that the next meeting could go either way. Here is what nobody on cable news will tell you. When the Fed splits this badly during an oil siege and a foreign war, what they are really fighting about is whether the central bank is still independent, or whether it has quietly become a department of the war economy. That is a question America has not had to ask itself since the late 1960s. For your wallet over the next 90 days, this means mortgage rates are not coming down on schedule. Credit card rates stay punishing, and small business lending stays frozen. My read is that one of the dissenters is going to leak their reasoning to the financial press within 3 weeks, and when that happens, the dollar takes another leg lower. But that story gets worse in the next one. Last week, the House of Representatives finally passed a clean funding bill for the Department of Homeland Security, ending a 76-day government shutdown that paralyzed airport security, immigration enforcement, and large parts of federal law enforcement. The vote was rushed through without a roll call. Republicans gave way on the border funding fight after public pressure on cancelled flights and emergency response delays. The complication is that nothing was actually solved. The border money is still missing. The political fight that triggered the shutdown is still alive, and the next funding deadline arrives in 78 days, which means the country gets to do this whole exercise again right before the holiday travel season. The revelation is that this 76-day stoppage cost the economy somewhere north of $14 billion in lost output, and it tied the president's hands during the most sensitive phase of the Iran negotiations. You cannot run secondary sanctions on Cuba while the Treasury cannot answer its phones. You cannot run a global blockade on Iranian crude while the Coast Guard is on furlough. The shutdown did not just hurt voters, it quietly rearranged the timing of the entire foreign policy agenda. And here is the fifth story, the one that ties the others together. Spirit Airlines, one of the largest budget carriers in the country, has effectively collapsed, stranding tens of thousands of passengers across the United States and Latin America. The carrier filed emergency notices with regulators after creditors refused another round of restructuring. This is not a Spirit problem. This is a signal that an entire layer of the American consumer economy is running out of altitude. 3 regional carriers in the past 9 months, 2 restaurant chains in October. The airline failure is the loudest one, but it is part of the same pattern. The complication is that the Federal Aviation Administration is short-staffed because of the shutdown, and the carrier left no orderly handover plan. Passengers are being told to rebook at full fare on competitors that have no spare capacity. The honest reading is that the post-pandemic consumer is finally tapped out, and the businesses that lived off thin margins are dropping one by one. My prediction is one more major consumer name fails before Thanksgiving, and the public conversation finally shifts from inflation back to recession. Step back from all 5 of these stories, and you see the same mechanism running underneath each one. American institutions, OPEC, the Fed, the Congress, the airlines, are all discovering that their old assumptions about partnership, consensus, and liquidity no longer hold. The system is still standing, but every load-bearing wall is being tested at the same time, and the question is, which one breaks first? Thank you for staying to the end. If you made it this far, you already know this kind of analysis takes hours of reading official filings, cross-checking sources across 3 languages, and finding the things nobody else has the time or the courage to publish. Like the video, because the algorithm pushes content that gets engagement, and that is how more people see it. Subscribe, because tomorrow morning I am posting the follow-up on which dissenter at the Fed is most likely to leak, and you will not want to miss it. If you can spare a super thanks, it goes straight into research time and source verification, with no advertiser ties and no political donors. A channel sponsorship helps keep this independent of any party, any hedge fund, and any media conglomerate, with no editorial strings attached. Tell me in the comments which of these stories hit you the hardest today. I read every comment in the first 48 hours and reply personally to as many as I can. Take care of yourself and the people who matter to you. See you in the next one.